everyone, and welcome to The Career Compass, a podcast from Jaruba, a global search firm based out of the UK. For today's episode, I'm excited to welcome Aaron Balick, a leading voice in the demystification of psychology, with a focus on unleashing its power to transform personal and professional lives. Aaron is based in London and is a published author, psychotherapist, consultant, and keynote speaker. A very warm welcome to the show, Aaron.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here.
It's a genuine honor to have you on the podcast. I appreciate you coming on to speak with me. More the fact that it's the first time I've had a guest with the same name as me, so I'm in good company.
I think it's the first time I've been a guest with a host with the same name as me too. So yeah, we're both in the same position.
Fantastic. New beginnings. We're approaching the halfway point of 2024. How is the year going for you so far?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good year. I started some sort of new projects, I think last year, 2023, that are kind of coming out of their beginning birthing stage into the everyday life stage, which is pretty satisfying. Also, it's late spring, which is always a mood lifter for me.
It's a nice time of year, although I think in the UK we're all a little bit underwhelmed by the weather to date. It hasn't been packed with sunshine and warm temperatures, but hope springs eternal. Maybe it's yet to come. Let's hope
Yes,
so.
I hope so.
So Aaron, you're an advocate of bringing clarity to the confusion that exists around your specialist area, namely psychology. So what was it that motivated you to focus on demystifying psychology for the public, and what impact have you seen from your efforts in this area over the last few years?
Well, there's like impact from general efforts, which has been massive, I think, through social media. Impact through my efforts, maybe a little bit less. We could talk about that. So I come from a particular end of psychology, like the old-fashioned end of psychology, the Freudian picture, right? So not exactly that, but comes from psychoanalysis. So it's not it's not the popular form of psychology today. It's all about the unconscious. It's all about thinking deeply, building insight. So it's really, in some ways, contrary to the psychology maybe you get on TikTok or Instagram. And I think what I love so much about it is I've gone so deeply into it and I've benefited so much from it. And all of that benefit seemed to me to come from either inside the clinic or the consulting room, or the halls of academia. And that what you get publicly either is maybe less so today, but sort of a suspectful, like a suspect, right? Like depth psychology or psychology in general, or it's stating the absolute obvious. So the puzzle for me was like, how do you go for quality, insight-oriented depth psychology in a way that people can understand it and benefit from it and not have to be with a therapist or not have to get a higher degree for it. Both of those things are great for it, but everybody doesn't need to do that to benefit from that. So that's really what kind of stirred my fire to get it out there in a different kind of a way.
So it's kind of a mission, I guess, to unlock the complexities, to put this into more straightforward language, easy to understand concepts. And did you find a major difference between academia and more general public life in the sense that there was a way of communicating it differently, perhaps through social media?
Absolutely and completely, right? In academia, particularly in my end of psychology, you have an awful lot of jargon, right? So, a libidinal cathexis of the external object would be a sentence you would read in a psychoanalytic book, right? Be like, what the hell is that? And actually, when you dig into the meaning of that, you can say it more easily. It is understandable because it's actually putting words on things that people experience. And what I noticed when I first started doing like kind of talks for different audiences, like first for young people, but then for businesses and that sort of thing. Basically, I would just be translating some of these ideas into basic English. And the effect that you would get from people to make sense of that was just so satisfying. Because when you're at an academic conference or something, everybody's speaking the same language. Everybody kind of knows a lot. So the movement is just a little bit, right? And when you're working as a therapist, it's a slow process, it's a gentle process. But if you're doing a 45-minute talk or a podcast or something, you can really give some gold, and people are like, oh wow, I can walk away with that, and that's very satisfying.
Yeah, I can well imagine. And I think unrelated to this really, but in the sense of, say, ChatGPT, which we're talking about quite a lot, is the ability to take a very complex subject matter and say, can you explain this to me as though I were 10 years old? And it's quite remarkably able to achieve really great results, to fine tune the level of communication understanding. And I guess, as you said, standing in a lecture hall full of professors that are already pretty au fait with the terminology and the subject matter is kind of a different task to going
Yeah,
into a classroom of primary school children, for example.
absolutely.
But
Yeah.
I can imagine the light bulbs and the aha moments are quite satisfying, aren't they? When people kind of click and they say, I get it now.
Absolutely. It's like the rails are off in a way. And it's also very different. Like if you're a person like myself who likes a portfolio job in a sense, the work of psychotherapy, it's one-to-one, it's very intense, it's isolating, it's just you and your client. In academia, it's very abstract and wordy and intellectualized. So to be able to take that stuff out, do it on the radio, do it with audience. I love skeptical audiences. I always joke with people that I wouldn't say there's nothing that I like more, but walking into a room full of lawyers, for example, where you walk into that room and they're already saying to themselves, who is this mug with his woolly bullshit, and I'm not sure if I could say bullshit on your
very
podcast,
skeptical.
but yeah, so I like to be able to offer them something immediately that shows them that this, you don't need to be skeptical. This stuff is for real, and to take it seriously is to broaden oneself. It improves your life. It improves your professional life. It improves your, in every sphere, this stuff can be applied.
100%, 100%. I mentioned, obviously, you're a published author. You wrote a book called The Psychodynamics of Social Networking, very kind of relevant topic in this day and age. Could you maybe elaborate further on the core insights from that book and how they apply to our current digital age?
Yeah. I mean, this I could talk for hours about, so I will try and keep it as brief as I can. But the main kind of take home from that book, in a sense, is that human psychology hasn't changed. So we operate off the same operating system, as it were, as we were in hunter-gatherer tribes, way back ancestrally. Yeah. And we have all sorts of challenges with that, and all sorts of technologies, and just living in big cities and all of this kind of stuff. So that book really looked at how does social media mediate our psychology. And basically the conclusion is that social media and other digital technologies allow us to extend our psychological selves into the digital world, right? So you and I are doing that a little bit right now with each other. This is a mediating technology. The people who are going to be listening to this, you and I are extending ourselves into their ears and into their minds in interesting ways, right? They could be driving or lying in bed, listening to our voices. You can go on and on, right? But what social media does is it mediates relationships. And the desire for relationship is a fundamental human motivation. So most people will be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is missing a really important one that came on board later, which is the need for recognition and relationship, right? As much as you need food, shelter, and safety, right? If you're not getting attention and love as a child, that has severe consequences when you get older, right? So that it's a natural, important, basic desire to reach out to others, be recognized them, and be recognized by them. You recognize them, they recognize you. Yeah. So you go into social media and it basically does this job, part of this job for us, right? We're looking at other people, they're looking at us, we're performing for them, they're performing for us. And the question in the book is, what do various platforms enable and disable in our psychology, right? And I won't go into too much detail, but basically, they appeal to the egoic aspects of the self that want to show up under the eyes of others in particular ways. And some platforms do this really well in certain conditions, and some do it really perniciously, right? So Twitter, for example, because of the amount of people that are out there, because of the lack of complexity in the interactions, can increase antisocial behavior, can increase activities around in-group and out-group. Instagram, we know for young people, can increase negative social comparison, feelings of anxiety and depression. And, you can go into each of these platforms, apply a psychoanalytic eye to it and say, what's happening here? What's not happening here? Yeah.
I mean, comparison being the thief of joy in the old adage. And there's such an interesting separate discussion. As you say, you could probably elaborate for hours on the same concept, but there've been so many articles about young people, as you say, negative comparisons, feeling lack of self-worth, looking at what is supposedly an idealized lifestyle that is arguably perpetuated or enabled at least by some of these platforms. So it's a
Yeah.
particularly interesting discussion. And going back to the original point about we're still using the same kind of modus operandi from the hunter-gatherer kind of age. It hasn't really evolved in that sense, but the world has accelerated in terms of technology. And so we've had to, as a species, continue adopting. So the next big challenge, I guess, is AI. But maybe that's a discussion for a future show. But really, really interesting. I'll happily put a link into your book in the episode description, so our readers
Thank you.
can take a look, or reviewers can
Great.
take a look at that. So there's no doubt we're in a fascinating moment in history right now. Some have described it as the latest industrial revolution, or at least a technological revolution. I tend to agree with that. From your personal perspective, how do you see the relationship between psychology and technology evolving over the next decade? And any predictions?
Well, I guess my beef is, in a sense, that there aren't enough of I could say, the right kind of psychologists working with tech developers, right? to ensure, or at least hedge, the development of technology in a more human-centric way. And I don't think this is, I mean, maybe in some areas it is, but I don't think this is like a pernicious thing. It's not a paranoid thing. But, if you're developing some kind of new platform, um, you know, in a world driven by profit, then your main objectives are going to be in engagement, how much time people are spending on there, getting a following. So the kind of psychologists they're going to be talking to are going to be consumer psychologists and psychologists of the, what color is going to attract engagement and how many, that kind of stuff. And so I think what you have, in a sense, is the two disciplines moving not in tandem enough, so moving in opposite directions. And the metaphor that I often use, because it also works with this hunter-gatherer thing, is the development of fast food, right? So fast food is developed by companies that want to appeal to the basic instincts, these hunter-gatherer instincts of the human being, make it really easy to get, and appeal to desire, right? So you go to your nearest fast food. You don't even need to go. So then you get delivered now, right, on your phone.
So you don't even have to leave the couch, in theory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the bar is super low, so you can get your fats, your sugars, and your carbohydrates all in a nice, tasty, greasy bun, if we like that kind of thing. And it appeals to those desires, right? But what you need is nutrition, right? So it's fine to have a burger and a donut now and then, but you should be eating nutritiously most of the time. And what technology offers us is the fast food equivalent most of the time. So we're getting burgers and donuts of relationship because that's what's being developed, where you kind of need the psychological side to ensure that it's a little bit more nutritious so people don't get lost in this junk food world of technology.
The endless scrolling, if you like, getting the burger delivered is almost like, going through endless reams of things in a sense. But I like your analogy very much, actually. Do you think, as you said, that maybe the two sides aren't really moving in tandem quite enough? Do you think there should be some safeguarding put in place in this instance?
I think for sure. I mean, I think the creators don't really have an interest in really regulating themselves, as we governments keep hoping that they will. They're also, I think, reluctant to look or even fund the kind of research that would indicate that there might be some dangers, and this has been related to the tobacco industry historically. It's like, well, why would we want to put research money into finding out that our product is bad for people?
Right.
So I do think that there is a responsibility, and I'm not at all like a techno dystopian. I used to be quite utopian. I've been tempered down a bit, but I think the possibility for greatness in technology is there, and one of the heartbreaking things for me, and your listeners may or may not agree, was, when Elon Musk took over Twitter, because I thought Twitter, a problematic thing as it is, has so much potential because of its reach, and the potential to kind of make it into a force for good was there, and it just feels completely wasted. And I think there's so much opportunity to bring out the best in people through these things. And I think people aren't
Mm.
adequately exploring them.
Yeah, and to kind of continue that point, I think the ethical piece is so important, particularly if we talk about the future of technological development, the next 5, 10 years. AI is currently in its infancy, but it will continue to evolve. And I think, maybe not just about safeguarding, but about ethical practices. Most companies should certainly consider having that framework in place where there is that kind of guarantee or that commitment, that pledge to make sure this is for the better of society, it's to advance the human cause, it's to make the world a better place. I think
Yeah.
that is a pretty important cornerstone. Yeah.
And that is happening. I mean, it's worth saying in some companies, and I know Google's AI is one of them, where they do have boards of, philosophers and ethicists who are kind of looking into this kind of stuff. But the danger is, anybody really anywhere can develop a platform that becomes international very quickly. So that's where you kind of start looking at, which is going to be impossible, I'm sure, but some kind of global regulation, because, it just pops up everywhere, right? You can access it from any country, anywhere you go.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I mean, if we think about the kind of media contribution side of the debate, so I'm aware in your case, your contributions to BBC Radio, publications like Wired and The Guardian, they've been pretty significant over the years. So when you're trying to tailor your psychological insights towards different media audiences that are looking to hear different things, they have different confirmation biases, what kind of approach do you tend to take in terms of your tailoring the message?
Mm-hmm. It's kind of a difficult one, right? Because I'll be the first to say it. Really, well, probably not the first to say it, but like as a psychotherapist myself, you know, a lot of it, a lot of psychology really is common sense. So like a lot of those memes that you're going to get over Instagram, it doesn't take a PhD in psychoanalysis to work out that, you should be kind to yourself, or, all of these platitudes, right? So my
Yeah.
aim is always to like avoid the platitudes as much as possible and see if you can get some kind of an edge that asks a question or asks somebody to look inward to their experience, to apply this kind of slightly deeper level of like giving it a little bit of time and digging a little bit of deeper than kind of just offering a simple, this is the thing. And the thing is, when we've learned, we've had 130 years of psychoanalysis or something like that. And over the years that we've learned that just intellectually knowing something doesn't necessarily turn into life change. That's why we've got, huge reams of self-help books that people read 20, 30 of them and they're still in the same place, right? So
Right.
the issue really isn't just to learn something new and handy, but to offer something that somebody can take further on their own and kind of work on it to really affect an important kind of a change.
I think so. So is there a difference between, say, being interviewed by, it's probably a crass example, but say the Daily Telegraph and the Guardian on this side of the kind of political horseshoe? Is there a
Mm-hmm.
difference in the message you would broadcast, or would you essentially kind of keep it the same, stay true to the kind of messaging principles?
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly the same, but I suppose I would say, since my point of view is very human-centered and very humanistic,
Mm.
there are social and political policies that run contrary to those sorts of things, for which there might be issues in the Guardian or the Telegraph, as it were.
Mm.
So I wouldn't say uh, there's an apolitical piece to it, even though I'm still drawing on what I think is the psychology from whatever 30,000 years ago, if that
Mm.
makes some sense. So like for example, I've been very clearly and vocally anti-Trump because I think he's anti-human. So that, I wouldn't be speaking to Truth Social about psychology, right? I don't think they'd
Mm.
want to hear my
No,
perspective anyway. But
no.
broadly on either side of the left or right, there's a big chunky middle to which I think everybody could kind of accept the general point of view.
Yes, I think so. I think so. One question I always like to ask my guests is around what advice they might give to our viewers who are at an earlier stage of their own journey. So, as a psychotherapist and consultant, what key advice would you give to young professionals aiming to achieve personal and professional growth? Maybe starting out in this very uncertain changeable world, what would be the kind of core tenets you would guide them toward?
Yeah. So the very main one is to listen honestly to yourself. And by
Mm,
honestly, I mean really opening your heart in those internal ears to conflicting aspects of yourself, because we all have
mm,
them, right? So you're
yeah.
going to have an aspect of yourself that's pulling towards something almost always, and you're going to have an aspect of yourself that's pulling away. And what we often do is try to brush under the rug the pulling away part and try to focus all on the pulling towards. Some people do exactly the opposite of that.
Mm,
But the more you stretch that and the more you ignore one side or the other, the stronger the tension occurs, and there's going to be a smack back. So there's going to be a
mm,
rebellion, right? It's like almost like a binge
yeah.
purge kind of a thing. And that's because
Mm,
we're operating off of different desires. That there is a desire to sit on the couch all day and watch Netflix. And there is a desire to achieve, and it's about balancing those. That's the most
mm,
important thing. So
mm,
once you start listening to that and being really honest about it, you start to be able to tell yourself, okay, watching the third episode on Netflix on a Monday night after work is too much. It's not working for me. But watching one is a nice come down and relax. And now I'm going to do something that's a little bit more nourishing for myself. And just kind of always reflecting in, asking yourself the right kind of questions keeps you alive to the choices that you want to make all the time. So you don't find yourself painting yourself into a corner that you then have to paint yourself out of later, ideally.
mm. So listen to your inner voice, keep your own counsel, take things with a certain element of balance and consideration, but effectively kind of keep your own kind of counsel. Listen to
Well, I
yourself,
think
listen
you
to the
also
body.
seek advice and mentorship. So I wouldn't say it's just
Mm,
keeping your own counsel. And mentorship and advice really helps. I think a model that really works for me also is this idea of inferior and superior functions. So basically,
mm,
the things that we're really good at and the things that we're less good at. And we tend to move towards our superior functions because they make us feel confident. And we tend to avoid our inferior functions because they can make us feel de-skilled. And we never, it's like handedness. Like if you're right-handed, you're never going to write as well with your left hand as your right hand, but you don't want to leave it to atrophy. So part of being honest to yourself is, I'm good at this and this and this, but I need some of this and this and this. So can I get mentorship and help and training to bring that up to scratch? Um, and can I try not to avoid it just because it's uncomfortable? And that's another thing where you're like, the honesty is like, okay, I'm avoiding this because I don't want to do it, not because I don't need to up my game. So not
mm,
being judgy about what you're good at and not good at, but identifying everybody's got strengths and weaknesses.
mm,
Live a lot of time in your strengths, but develop the weaknesses and then delegate those weaknesses later if you're able to.
mm. Excellent, excellent. I kind of firmly believe everyone has the kind of unique set of skills and value add that they can bring. And I think it's being, as you said, kind of gentle enough with yourself to recognize where are the strengths, where can I utilize them, and also on the flip side, where are the limitations. So being kind of gentle enough with yourself, but also kind of taking a maybe a pragmatic view at times, to
Yeah.
enhance the strengths and maybe outsource or get some help with the weaknesses. Yeah. Um, so I'd like to talk briefly about your time at Still Point. So you're working in that mission as the director of Still Point Spaces. I'd love to know a little bit more about how it served the community, what the mission was. Could you share a little bit about Still Point?
Well, talking about inferior and superior capacities, it's a good follow-on question because still point, the idea of still point is a little bit what we were talking about, which is kind of to actually create an international community in real spaces and online to kind of share these wonderful insights of depth psychology, which is problematic because depth psychology is hard to sell, despite the fact, I mean, literally hard to sustain as a
Yeah.
business. Um, but also it relied entirely on all of my inferior capacities. So it was kind of a little bit impulsive of me to take on the work. This came after my book, where I was kind of, in a sense, placed to develop some kind of maybe technological solutions and applications of depth psychology onto all sorts of things. That's why I found myself in that space. But
Mm,
then suddenly I found myself negotiating commercial leases and HR law and spreadsheets, I mean, talk about an inferior capacity. Like Excel is an entirely inferior capacity for me. Managing people, which I thought I would be really good at because of my psychology background, but maintaining work employee boundaries are very different from psychotherapist patient
I
boundaries.
can imagine there's a conflict there somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was pretty hardcore. It was very, very, very hard for me. We ended up having to close it down after COVID because our spaces were empty for way too long, and we suffered like everybody else did.
Yeah.
I still believe in that mission. Looking back, I probably needed more of that mentorship and support on that business side. I eventually got it, but I think I got it a little bit too late, relied on myself a little bit too much. But now, at least personally, that inferior side is so much stronger than it used to be. And I've identified that I really don't want to live there, but if I'm required to use those skills, I've got them more than I do.
Yeah.
But I would love to be able to do something that catches a little bit better, that still combines that sort of public facing idea of depth psychology.
I guess the takeaway was that it was a useful experience. You were kind of arguably a little bit outside the comfort zone or in new and slightly less familiar territory. So, as you said, you kind of probably came away from it thinking it wasn't necessarily where I want to spend all my time, but I would know better how to deal with certain situations, or I'd have a better view of it. So I think certainly not a wasted experience. And flipping to the other side of the fence, we talked obviously a little bit about your work in academia. I'm curious to understand how that's affected your clinical role. So could you tell us a little bit about how you kind of entered academia, how your experience was? I think you're now an honorary lecturer at the University of Essex, so love to hear more about that journey.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting also in following on from Still Point, because these journeys are all about life choices in a sense, right? So I trained clinically first. I got really interested in this depth end of psychology, which I didn't get enough of in my clinical training. So I pursued a PhD in psychoanalysis. And then after that, I got a job on faculty on one of the only programs in psychoanalysis in the country. It's a very rare kind of area, university niche. You get a lot of psychology, but psychoanalysis is a bit more niche. So in a sense, it was the perfect job. I had a clinical practice, small on the side, but 4 days a week pretty much in university. And I found university life really difficult in a similar but different way to Still Point, just that it was highly bureaucratic. There was a lot to do with recruitment and building programs, and not enough time for research, not enough time for teaching. And I just found myself becoming unhappy spending most of my time doing that. And I always think it's really important for people to, this is the listening in. If you start to have a feeling of dread about your work, that's something to really listen to, because if you don't listen to dread, it can lead you into depression. Dread has a really important message. So I started having a feeling of dread about that job, and I finally gave in my notice. So honorary is great because you get to go in every now and then. You still have an attachment, but you also get to develop your own stuff. And I said to my director of programming, I'd like to give my notice. And he said, oh, have you got something else lined up? I said, no. And he said, well, have you got plans? And I said, no. And he said, well, why are you leaving? And I said, I'm unhappy. And he looked at me like, we're all unhappy, Aaron. Like, you don't leave a job because you're unhappy. What's wrong with you? I remember thinking, yeah. What's that?
Kind of join the club. Everyone's in this same
club.
Yeah,
exactly. That is the expectation. And I thought, that is not, on paper, this job looks great. In my life, it doesn't look great. I feel confident that I will find something different outside of this world. And it gave me so much, just like Still Point did. It gave me all of these great writing skills, comprehension skills, critical thinking, teaching skills. But I didn't want to live there. And now it's enough of part of my life that I really enjoy. And then I get to do all of this other stuff that I enjoy. So that, again, it's like, really listen to resistance, listen to the push and pull factors, right? If something's pulling you somewhere, listen to that. If something's pushing you, sometimes it's better to have a plan. But when it turns into dread, sometimes you just have to trust that plan's going to come next.
It's such a powerful word, isn't it? Dread, and if you're getting these signals, as you say, you've got to listen to them. You've got to, interpret them, act upon them, take necessary action. Otherwise, it'll
Yeah.
probably lead to, well, almost certainly, rather than probably lead to greater problems down the line.
And it's fear on the other side, which is really important to say, that people get stuck because they're stuck between dread and fear. And I don't want to say that it's an axiom, but it's almost always better to choose fear, because almost all of the time you're fearing more than the actual consequence. So it's just, you got to step into that fear and away from the dread.
I agree. But we're looking ahead as a last question. I guess you've probably got some very exciting projects upcoming, some research in the pipeline. So what kind of things are you most looking forward to, and how do you envision them all contributing further to the field of psychology?
Well, I can hardly believe it myself, but the psychodynamics of social networking came out 10 years ago now. And though the basic premise I still stand behind, because, our psychology hasn't changed in the past 10 years any more than it has in the past 30,000. Social media and technology has changed a lot. So I'll be working on the revision of that book across this year, which I think will be really fascinating. And also recently I launched a podcast with my colleague Natalina Hai called Time to Show Up, which is a very slimmed down and maybe more specific version of something I was doing at Stillpoint, which is applying ideas from behavioral science and psychoanalysis to how you live your professional life more aligned to your personal creative mission. So really seeing work as an aspect of one's life rather than as a work-life balance that needs to be achieved. So it's yet another application of psychological thinking onto other stuff.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put a link into that as well as the book in the episode description on our YouTube channel as well. Aaron, it's been great having you on the show. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for taking the time.
It's been a real pleasure, Aaron. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. If anyone wishes to pose a question or get in touch with myself or Aaron, you can find our emails enclosed as well. We would welcome the opportunity to answer any queries you may have. And until next time, all the very best and take care.
Thanks for having me.